The world is full of mysteries that may never be solved. Sometimes that's because the vital data has been lost or an archaeological site has been destroyed. Other times it's because new evidence is unlikely to be found due to the passage of time, and the surviving documentation is too limited to lead experts to a definitive answer. But often, the lack of answers just makes the subjects more intriguing. While here we'll look at 5 enduring mysteries of the world and nature, some that are close to being solved, but that still hold a fascination to both the public and the experts trying to solve them. So as always, sit back and enjoy the wonders of the world we live in. The vanished Roanoke Island colony. In 1584, English settlers arriving in the New World attempted to set up a colony on Roanoke Island, North Carolina. However, after less than a year, they abandoned their plans due to severe weather, lack of supplies, and poor relations with the indigenous people. 3 years later, they tried again, and in 1587, Virginia Dare was born, the granddaughter of Captain John White, one of the founders of the colony. Virginia was said to be the first English-born child in the New World. But all was not well for the settlers, and Captain John was forced to leave his family and return to England to obtain supplies. John remained in England for the next 3 years, as the Queen had forbidden all shipping due to Spanish Armada attacks on England. When he finally returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, the settlers, along with his family, had vanished. It is said that all he found was the words Crow and Croatoan carved on 2 trees. When John saw these words, he believed that the settlers had sought the help of the Croatan Indians on the nearby Hatteras Island. He was, however, puzzled, as before he left for England, it had been decided by the group that should they move during his absence due to disaster or attack, a Maltese cross image would be left behind to indicate this. However, no such symbol was found. John knew the settlers had established good relations with the Croatans, so it was plausible for him to assume that the colonists had gone there. Yet due to the terrible weather conditions, White was unable to investigate the matter further, and decided to go back to England instead, leaving behind the mysterious disappearance of the colony and his family. White never returned to the New World, and never heard from his family again. To this day, their fate, and that of the other settlers, is unknown. So what happened to them? One of the theories is that they managed to integrate themselves with the Croatan people. This theory is backed up by historians who wrote of a tribe of North Carolina Indians who spoke English fluently, practiced Christianity, and called themselves Croatan Indians. Also, there were between 20 and 30 English surnames from the Roanoke settlers found in the Croatan tribe, suggesting that integration between the two peoples had happened. But by the early 17th century, the Croatans had become extinct, but their direct descendants, the Lumbee, who still exist today, appear to have prominent European features. By 1650, the Lumbee had migrated and settled in Robson County. Although the intermarriage between the Croatans and the missing English settlers is the most popular explanation for the origins of the Lumbee, it is not accepted by all. Some believe that a darker fate befell the settlers. Many believe cannibalism by local tribes was responsible for their disappearance, and this accounts for the lack of human remains found at the site. Others suggest the settlers died of disease or starvation, or that they perished at sea while desperately trying to return to England. Then in 1937, Louis E. Hammond, a California tourist, found a stone by the east bank of the Chowan River in Chowan County, North Carolina. The stone weighed around 21 pounds and was covered in markings that Hammond couldn't decipher. He took it to Emory University, asking for help to interpret the markings. The inscription was interpreted as a message from Eleanor White Dare, John's daughter and mother of Virginia. It appeared to be an update to her father. This is their interpretation. After the find, a group of Emory professors travelled with Hammond to the site where he claimed to have discovered the stone. They could not determine the precise location of the find, but the trip convinced the professors that Hammond was telling the truth. The discovery prompted a wave of other stones being found, 47 in total, and they collectively became known as the Dare Stones. The stones were inscribed with messages, supposedly written by members of the lost Roanoke colony. The stones created a media circus in the United States as the public became fascinated with the possible resolution of the lost colony's fate. However, the 47 stones found after Hammond's discovery were of a markedly different style and were eventually connected to a Georgia stonecutter and discredited. By 1941, scholars and the press had dismissed all of the Dare stones as hoaxes. Although the authenticity of Hammond's original stone has not been conclusively proven or disproven, and recently researchers have taken another look at the first Dare stone, declaring if it's real, it's the most significant artifact in American history of early European settlement, and if it's not, it's one of the most magnificent forgeries of all time. The stone may hold the key to finding out what actually happened to the settlers who vanished on Roanoke Island, but for now, it still remains a mystery. Devil's Kettle Falls. At the waterfalls along Lake Superior's north shore, a river forks at a rock outcropping. While one side tumbles down a two-step stone embankment and continues on like a typical waterfall, the other side vanishes into a deep hole and disappears. The spot is known as the Devil's Kettle, located in Judge C.R. Magny State Park in the US state of Minnesota. Where the water goes when it flows into the gigantic hole has baffled tourists and geologists for generations. Park visitors and curious minds have tested different theories as to where the water ends up by dropping sticks, coloured ping pong balls, GPS devices, and other objects into the hole without ever seeing them resurface downstream. Other reports have circulated, including a young man who rappelled 26 feet into the hole. Stories like that led to speculation that the waterfall must have a separate unknown outlet into Lake Superior, or that the water plunges deep into the Earth's crust. One thing is for sure, it is no doubt impressive. For years, where all that water went was a mystery. However, in February 2017, Minnesota's Department of Natural Resources strongly indicated after a series of experiments that the water simply flows back into the river at the bottom of the falls. But if it's really that simple, why has nothing ever been recovered in any of the ping pong ball experiments or anything else that has been dropped into the hole? Well, experts who carried out the official experiments explained that the pressure of the plunge explains why no objects have ever resurfaced. Since the force of that plunge is so great, any objects would be held down and pulverized into nothing, never reappearing. However, their experiments failed to establish exactly where the water is re-emerging, but they suspect it empties out right below where it flows in. It was decided that further experiments would be done to establish the outlet. They wanted to drop a chemical dye into the hole with hopes that they would see the dye resurface at the bottom of the falls. It was the last test to be conducted to finally prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was in fact no mystery at all. But it seems the announcement caused another mystery, as to date that experiment has not been carried out, and apparently park management deemed it unnecessary, stating that it was not scientifically necessary to confirm that the water simply rejoins the river below the falls. This has caused more speculation, with many now questioning the untesting scientific theory, believing the mystery of where the Devil's Kettle's water goes. What do you think? The star jelly. A star jelly are blobs of gelatinous substance that appear on the ground, generally in rural areas. The blobs have been observed in a variety of translucent colours, ranging from white to luminous yellow. They are usually quite small, although large masses have been reported. The goo often evaporates shortly after appearing. But what are they, and where do they come from? Folklore suggests that the jelly falls from the stars during meteor showers. Others believe they are a kind of fungus. Some of the more bizarre theories are that they are a communication method from the dead, something excreted by aliens or a part of a government conspiracy to poison us. But in reality, no one knows what the mysterious substance is. The first recorded mention of the jelly was in the 14th century, when it was suggested it could be used to treat abscesses. It was also around this time that its name evolved from a star which has fallen to star slime, then finally to star jelly. In Mexico, locals even refer to it as moon excrement. In 1979, Fate magazine claimed they had solved the mystery of the gooey substance, saying it consisted of extraterrestrial cellular organic matter, which exists as prestellar molecular clouds. However, this claim has widely been dismissed, as it's very unlikely that the jelly comes from clouds. Even the closest molecule cloud to Earth, the Taurus molecule cloud, is 430 light-years away. Besides, most of the material in these clouds consists of gases and dust, not jelly-like goo. It is also unlikely that the substance comes from meteors, aka falling stars, as meteors rarely make it to the ground as they burn up in our atmosphere. Even if they did have a jelly element, it would never make it to the ground. Additionally, although it's assumed it falls from the sky, there are no account of anyone witnessing it. They just report finding the jelly in the morning after a meteor shower. A more plausible idea is that the gelatinous substance could be the remains of frogs, toads, worms, or other creatures, perhaps after a predator has spit them out. Another theory is that the substance is actually a type of algae. The blue algae, for example, forms colonies made up of cells in a gelatinous sheath. It's hard to see on the ground, but once it rains, it swells up. Another suggestion is it's connected to female amphibian reproduction. The spawn is held in a substance known as glycoprotein, which is stored in the female's body. But if the animal is attacked by a predator or scared, it will quite naturally drop its spawn and the associated glycoprotein. The glycoprotein is designed to swell on contact with water or dewy ground, much like the algae mentioned earlier. However, no frog spawn has ever approached the size of some reported cases of star jelly. There is one problem with this theory, however. When the jelly was tested, it was concluded that the specimen did not contain any DNA, plant or animal. So it's unlikely that the substance has a connection with the animal or plant life in question, although it's worth pointing out that this was just one sample. Slime molds is another possibility. They can appear suddenly, exhibit a very gelatinous appearance at first, and later change to a dust-like form, which is dispersed by rain and wind. The colours range from striking pure white to pink, purple, bright yellow, orange, and brown, depending on the species. However, ultimately, no one really knows what causes star jelly, as it doesn't hang around long enough to be properly studied. So for now, this one is unsolved and still up for debate. If you ever see a blob of strange jelly-like goo on your morning walk, it's probably best to leave it alone. When nature tricked us for years. Now this one is kind of solved, but it's still a great example of nature messing with our heads. Scattered across the world are several bewildering, mysterious spots that appear to defy gravity. Places where cars seem to drift uphill and cyclists struggle to push themselves downhill. They seem to defy the laws of physics. These bizarre areas are known as gravity hills and can be found in the US, the UK, Australia, Brazil, Italy, and Canada, one of which my wife and I visited ourselves during a trip to Canada. Many have become tourist attractions, with people flocking to the area to experience the phenomena for themselves. Of course, these areas have spawned all sorts of rumours over the years, from unknown forces pulling you upwards, to witchcraft and giant magnets buried in the countryside. However, there is an explanation for this bizarre phenomena, and it appears that it is nature getting the last laugh. It turns out they are just optical illusions, an illusion so good it can be impossible to believe with your own eyes, and you would need the proper equipment to prove it. If you get surveying equipment or GPS markers to measure the difference between the top of the slope and the bottom, you'll realize that everything is actually in reverse. The hills are sloped in a way that gives you the effect that you're going uphill, but you are actually going downhill, even though your brain gives you the impression that you're going uphill. According to psychologists, it's all about the horizon. Either it's obscured in areas with gravity hills, so we don't have a proper point of reference, or the horizon is there, but it obscures how the hill slopes in relation to the rest of the landscape. Of course, not everyone accepts the scientific explanation, as if you are on a gravity hill, it's hard to believe. For example, there is a gravity hill in Lake Wales, Florida, known as Spooky Hill, where a sign is displayed that tells the story of a great battle between a giant alligator and a Native American chief. A lake was formed at the site by the ghost of one of them, which is said to be the cause of the Gravity Hill. Here, you are actually encouraged to try out the Gravity-Defying hill for yourself. Many of the gravity hills around the world have been utilised as tourist attractions, some with fanciful tales attached to them to attract more visitors, but in reality, they are just a confusion of the brain caused by Mother Nature herself. "17 Tiny Coffins." In early July 1836, 3 Scottish boys were out searching for rabbit burrows in the rock formation near Edinburgh, known as Arthur's Seat. The boys came across some thin sheets of slate that appeared to have been placed over a rock alcove. When they removed the slate, it revealed 17 tiny coffins, each 3 or 4 inches long. There were 2 tiers of 8 coffins each, and the third one with just 1 coffin. Not realizing their significance, the boys started hurling the tiny boxes at each other, damaging many of them. The next day, the surviving coffins were retrieved by the boys' schoolmaster, Mr. Ferguson, who was a member of a local archaeological society. At this point, the coffins were still unopened, so Mr. Ferguson took them home in a bag, and that evening he settled down in his kitchen and began to prise the lids open with a knife. Each coffin contained a miniature wooden figure of human form cut out in wood. The faces in particular were fairly detailed. Some of the figures had missing arms, presumably because they didn't fit in the tiny coffin. They were dressed from head to toe in cotton clothes and laid out with all the trappings of a funeral. Their coffins were regularly shaped and cut out of a single piece of wood, with the exception of the lids, which were nailed down with wire sprigs or brass pins. It was thought the coffins had been placed individually in the little cave, and at intervals of many years. In the first tier, the coffins were quite decayed, and the wrappings had moulded away. In the second tier, the effects of age had not advanced so far, and the top coffin was quite recent looking. For nearly 100 years, not much more was known about the origin or purpose of the strange miniature coffins, and fewer than half of them survived. Those that did eventually found their way into the collection of Robert Fraser, a jeweller who put them on display in his private museum. After Fraser's retirement in 1845, the collection was auctioned off and sold for just over £4. The coffins then passed into unknown private hands and remained there until 1901, when a set of 8, together with their contents, were donated to the National Museum of Scotland by their then owner, Christina Cooper. The mystery was what exactly the coffins were, who had placed them in their hiding place, and when. Several potential explanations were offered, the most popular being that the burials were part of some spell work, or that they represented mimic burials, perhaps for sailors lost at sea. The only comprehensive study of the coffins was carried out several years ago by Alan Simpson and Samuel Menefee, and they pointed out the most striking visual feature of the coffins is the use of applied pieces of tinned iron as decoration. Analysis of this metal suggests that it is very similar to the sort of tin used in shoe buckles, and opens up the possibility that the coffins were the work of a shoemaker or leather worker, who would have had the manual skills to make the coffins, but would have lacked the carpentry skills needed to make a neater job of it. Some disagree with this and believe the coffins represent an event that happened at the time, perhaps the loss of a ship with 17 fatalities or some other tragedy. The most obvious being the Westport murders by William Burke and William Hare. Burke and Hare were responsible for 17 murders in Edinburgh during the late 1820s, and it would not be unreasonable for somebody in the absence of the 17 dissected bodies to wish to atone the dead, the majority of whom were murdered in atrocious circumstances, with a form of burial to let their spirits at rest. The most credible theory is that they were made by someone who knew Burke and Hare, and so had a strong motive to make amends for their crimes. Suggestions that Burke and Hare may be responsible for burying the coffins in an act of remorse seems unlikely, as both murderers were arrested almost immediately after committing their 17th killing, leaving little or no time for any burial to be made. A DNA sample for Burke has been obtained from the murderer's skeleton, which is preserved at Edinburgh University, but no traces of DNA could be recovered from the buried figurines. Another objection to this is that no fewer than 12 of Burke and Hare's victims were female, yet the clothed bodies found in the coffins appear to be dressed in male clothing. We think this is one mystery that will never be solved, but the story behind it is fascinating. So that's 5 incredible mysteries of the world and nature. Never forget to take a moment out of your day or week to realize just how incredible and mysterious this planet really is. There are millions of mysteries that surround us every day, and we often get so caught up with everything else, we forget to see and take the time to appreciate these mysteries. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.